Are you a writer or filmmaker struggling with perfectionism? If so, then you are in the right place, my creative friend, because in this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 deadly sins of perfectionism, and I'm going to offer my top 3 tips to fight it. So before we dive into the 5 deadly sins of perfectionism, let's think for a second about what is the root of the problem and what causes perfectionism. Well, the dirty secret about perfectionism is, well, I get ahead of myself. I'll reveal the secret at the end of this video. First, let's count down the 5 deadly sins of perfectionism, and remember to stick around to the end where I share my top 3 tips for managing it. Coming in at number 5 of the 5 deadly sins of perfectionism is resistance to criticism. Difficulty with receiving feedback is one of the hallmarks of perfectionists. Now, why is that? Well, because people who struggle with perfectionism tend to interpret criticism as an attack on our abilities. Criticism speaks to our inner saboteur, that little voice inside our head who's always nitpicking and kind of wants to see us fail. Perfectionists beat ourselves up with such viciousness that we naturally see criticism from others the same way. It takes some training and internal work to realize that A, we should be kind to ourselves, and B, when other people offer feedback, their intent is not to destroy us, they're actually trying to help us get better. The funny thing is that even if the feedback is entirely positive, the perfectionist in us might start to play detective and search for the hidden slight beneath the praise. That way we can snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Coming in at number 4 is the one that I struggle with the most, and I feel so much shame about, I don't even want to talk about it. But here we go. Tossing the baby out with the bathwater. Your script begins with a clear, focused idea, but over time, as you write, the perfectionist in your head tells you the theme isn't smart enough, character isn't relatable enough, dialogue isn't snappy enough. So eventually, it can lead to you cutting things that were actually working, or worst of all, tossing the whole script out in a fit of shame and never talking about it again. So if you tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, you're not alone. We all do it. But you have to catch yourself and talk yourself out of it, because there's no greater tragedy than throwing out a perfectly good script or a promising idea because it's not yet perfect. Coming in at number 3 is a phenomenon known as mission creep, and it's a subject I find really fascinating. Mission creep was first documented by the Washington Post columnist Jimmy Lee Hoagland. He was describing how the UN intervention in Somalia grew from a humanitarian mission into a full-scale military operation, leading to the loss of many innocent lives. Mission creep has since entered the lexicon to describe the phenomenon of any project growing in scope and piling on objectives until it becomes so big and bloated that it becomes impossible to finish or even start. If you try to cover every possible angle and incorporate every new idea into your script, the script will keep expanding out to the horizon, out of your reach. This can lead to procrastination and eventual abandonment of the script. The number 2 deadly sin of perfectionism is paralysis by analysis. In 2003, psychologist Barry Schwartz discovered that when faced with too many choices, people might experience a kind of mental paralysis as they worry about making the wrong choice. He called this effect the paradox of choice, which, coincidentally, was the name of my second album. When individuals are presented with numerous options, they struggle to make a choice due to the cognitive and even emotional burden associated with evaluating each option. And this leads to the phenomenon known as paralysis by analysis. And it's one that really affects storytellers, because writing and creating and making films involves making decisions constantly. So this puts a huge cognitive load on our brains, and it can really tire us out. And that leads you to getting locked up and stuck. I'm of the opinion that 90% of writer's block cases are due to paralysis by analysis. The number 1 deadly sin of perfectionism is the most paradoxical and sneaky, and it is a lack of originality. Now, let me explain for a second. To be truly original and unique in your storytelling, you have to break new ground and go places nobody has gone before. You have to innovate. But innovation requires trial and error. It requires experimentation. And experimentation, by definition, is about making mistakes. And nothing terrifies we perfectionists more than making mistakes. That's the perfectionist conundrum. All of this brings me back to the question I asked at the start of the video. What is the root of perfectionism. What causes it? Perfectionists will tell you that the reason for their perfectionism is a commitment to excellence, but that's actually a lie that we tell ourselves. Perfectionism isn't driven by the pursuit of excellence. Perfectionism is driven by fear. It's driven by the ego trying to protect us from looking foolish. Perfectionism is the ego's stupid, overprotective nose poking into a creative space and asking, "Are you sure? What if people laugh at you?" Perfectionism wants to keep us in the tried and true sphere, in the safe confines of what's worked before. But that road doesn't lead to perfection. It leads to mediocrity. Perfection requires excellence, and excellence requires innovation. Innovation requires the courage to take the big swing, but you'll never take the big swing if you let your fear of making a mistake control you. But take comfort in knowing that perfectionism is something most writers and creatives struggle with, and there are numerous workarounds. So here are my top 3 tips for fighting perfectionism. My number 3 tip for fighting perfectionism is self-identification. Perfectionism loves to hide in the shadows. He's a sneaky little bastard. But when you identify it and call it out, it loses some of its power over you. See, the thing is that perfectionism is like germs. It hates daylight. By identifying it and owning it, we begin the fight against it. Number 2 is what I call permission to stink. There's a reason why most writers don't show their first drafts, and it's because first drafts suck. They're supposed to. That's the whole reason for being. They're first drafts. But tell that to that little perfectionist bastard inside your head, because that a-hole is insisting every word has to be perfect. So what I do while writing my first draft is remind myself, I'm just getting it down now so I can refine it later. And that works really, really well. I say I'm giving myself permission to stink. So next time your perfectionist voice tells you that this first draft isn't perfect, you tell yourself, I have permission to stink. I'll fix it later. My number 1 tip for overcoming perfectionism is community. Isolation is a breeding ground for perfectionism, but joining a writing group or class helps keep it in check, gets you out of your own head, gives you the benefit of other writers' perspectives, helping breaking log jams and inspiring you to just keep plugging. Perfectionism is hard to exist in a community of writers because we recognize it in each other, and we call it out, and we're able to help each other break free from it. So find a writers group online, there's lots of free ones, or enroll in a writing course. I've got a number of screenwriting courses you can check out in the description box thing below. And hey, if you struggle with perfectionism, drop a comment in the box below and share the tips, tricks, and strategies that you use, because those strategies might really help others. So that's a wrap for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe for more high-quality videos about screenwriting, filmmaking, and the art of story. This is James Hurst for Screenwrite. Happy writing.